In archaeology, there is a word for a culture that spreads so fast and so wide that it seems to appear everywhere at once. They call it a horizon, not a single kingdom, not an empire with a capital city, a shared way of living, a shared way of making tools, a shared way of burying the dead. South of the Urals, the Andronovo Horizon. The name comes from a small village near Achinsk in southern Siberia. In 1914, workers laying a railway line cut straight through a burial mound. An archaeologist named Sergei Teplukov, sorting through the salvage finds 13 years later, named what he'd found after the nearest village on the map. Nobody had heard of Andronovo. Almost nobody has since. The culture is another matter. Not small. Millions of square kilometers. From the Ural Mountains east to the borders of China. From the Siberian forests south to the deserts of Uzbekistan. 1800 to 900 BCE. If you flew across it 4,000 years ago, you would see the same timber-framed houses overlooking rivers, the same pottery with geometric zigzags, the same spoked wheel tracks in the dirt. For decades, historians looked at this massive space on the map and assumed it was a vacuum, a wasteland of nomadic herders going nowhere. The archaeology tells a different story. It was the industrial powerhouse of the Bronze Age world, and it was moving. The people of Arkaim burned their cities and walked away, but they did not disappear. They expanded. The Andronovo is not a different people. It is the same people, wider. The Sintashta culture of Arkaim dissolved outward into a horizon that stretched across a continent. They took the engineered horse. They took the spoked war chariot. And they took something else, an obsession with metal. In the Altai mountains, thousands of miles east of the Urals, archaeologists found their mines. Deep shafts cut into solid rock, using stone hammers and fire setting, heating the rock face, then throwing cold water on it to crack it apart. Not surface scratching, extracting thousands of tons of copper and tin. One branch went east, along the Altai mountains and the edge of the Tarim Desert, toward China. In the 13th century BCE, a spoked wheel chariot appears at the Shang court at Anyang, fully formed, with no local developmental sequence, no prototype. It arrived complete. Another branch went south, toward the oases, toward India. They built their settlements along the banks of calm steppe rivers, where the wide floodplain meadows gave them pasture, where the fertile soil gave good harvests. Semi-subterranean houses, dug into the earth for warmth, 2 or 3 rooms connected by internal passages, each room heated by a hearth built from flat stone slabs. The roof, a wooden frame rising on thin logs and stone supports, covered in reed matting. At every entrance, a separate draft room, a small airlock against the steppe wind, built to protect the sleeping quarters from the cold. In the excavated hearths, bone needles, bronze knives, a bone tool for scraping hides. In the fields, millet, rye, wheat. Outside, cattle, horses, sheep, and no pigs. Not one across any Andronovo site anywhere, because pigs cannot follow a moving camp. A pig tells you that you plan to stay. Not wanderers, not settlers, something in between. We know what they looked like. Burials found in Xinjiang, preserved in the dry desert air, show people who looked European. They wore long shirts below the knee, trousers, knitted woolen socks. Men and women dressed the same way. You could only tell them apart by their ornaments, and by who had weapons. Their pottery was made by hand. 2 shapes, a straight-walled jar and a curved or angled pot, decorated with geometric stamps pressed into the wet clay. Zigzags, triangles. To understand what the Andronovo valued, look at how they buried their dead. Under earth mounds called kurgans, each one enclosed by a ring of standing or flat-laid stone slabs, a circle of stone around the dead, a boundary between the living world and the other one. Inside the mound, a timber chamber, buried deep. Always the same orientation. Body on the left side, facing west, towards the setting sun. In one burial, an infant, on its left side, facing west. At its head, a small ceramic vessel, placed there with food for the journey, because the Andronovo believed the dead needed to eat. In another burial, a man and a woman, lying on their sides, facing each other, their fingers intertwined. The pose was deliberate, arranged. It meant something. And then, the woman's skull had been carefully detached from her body, turned upside down, placed back in the tomb. Archaeologists interpret this as the burial of a shaman woman, or a mother figure, a carrier of the fertility cult, whose power was too significant to simply be laid to rest in the ordinary way. The body was separated, but the skull stayed. Close, present, in the same earth. And beside the dead, almost always, the bones of the horse. Not the whole animal, the head and the lower legs, the parts left after a sacrificial feast. The ritual matches the Rigveda, the Ashvamedha, the horse sacrifice. The animal slaughtered, its flesh consumed by the tribe, its sacred parts buried with the dead. The texts were written down in India centuries later. The bones are in the Siberian earth today. Not every Andronovo burial is an inhumation. In some, only ash. Emma Usmanova, who has directed excavations at Lysakovsk in Kazakhstan for 30 years, describes the logic. The fire does not destroy. It transports, and it connects without a break in the chain to the cremation pyres of the Ganges 2,000 years later. The headwear tells the rest. Usmanova's excavations produced headdresses in multiple distinct styles across different ages. Girls wore one type, young women another, older women a third. One reconstructed headdress, 12 meters of braided cord, 70 hours of work, made at night, because in daylight too many errors crept in. 18th century BCE, Hammurabi's Babylon rising in Mesopotamia, the Hittites in Asia Minor, Egypt in the Middle Kingdom, building temples expanding borders. In Syria, the Kingdom of Mitanni. These were the great powers, the civilizations with armies and archives and stone monuments that would last 3,000 years. And all of them needed bronze. Copper alone is soft, useless for weapons. Tin hardens it. But tin is rare. A specific geology, specific deposits. The Andronovo people found them. And the great Bronze Age empires needed what was under the Andronovo's feet. In 1982, a ship was found off the coast of southern Turkey, the Uluburun wreck, dated to around 1320 BCE. Inside its hull, 10 metric tons of copper ingots, 1 metric ton of tin, enough to equip 5,000 soldiers with bronze swords. A 2022 analysis in Science Advances traced 1/3 of that tin to mines in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, more than 3,000 kilometers from where the ship went down, handed from trader to trader, across rivers and deserts, from the steppe to the palaces of pharaohs. The herders of the north were not isolated. They held something the ancient world needed. But metal was not the only thing moving. The people themselves were going south. We know they made it, not from legend, from the bones. In 2015, Allentoft and colleagues extracted DNA from Andronovo burials in Siberian earth, published in Nature. In 2019, Narasimhan and colleagues, together with Harvard geneticist David Reich, published the largest ancient DNA study of South and Central Asia ever conducted in Science. The results were precise. In one part of the study, researchers examined 44 male individuals from Middle-Late Bronze Age steppe burials, Sintashta and Andronovo cultures. All 44 carried R1-Z93. Every single one. The researchers then examined the Indus Valley Civilization, the great urban culture that collapsed around 1900 BCE. Not a single Harappan individual carries steppe ancestry. Not one. Then the Swat Valley, Northern Pakistan. Iron Age individuals dated 1200 to 800 BCE, it appears. Today, R1-Z93 is found in 40 to 70% of men in many North Indian upper caste populations, in Pashtun and Tajik communities, in North Indian Brahmin lineages, where some studies record frequencies of 50 to 72%, the people who still memorize the Rigveda today. But between the Andronovo steppe and the Indus plains lay centuries, and deserts, and mountains. And before any of that, in the river basins of Central Asia, between the steppe and India, they ran into something they had never seen before, an empire of mud, protected by massive walls. That is a story for another time.